Welcome to Business Unmuted, which today is coming live from Vertu BMW in Teesside, thanks to our sponsor, Vertu Motors, one of the UK's largest motor retailers. Check out its website at vertumotors.com. I'm Graham Robb, and I've owned Recognition PR for nearly 35 years. We've got 75 clients in multiple sectors based across the UK who have between them a turnover of around £6 billion and employ around 30,000 staff. So we're at the front line of the business community and perfectly placed to discuss the economic climate. We're broadcasting live on the 15th of March 2023, and a couple of hours ago the Chancellor gave his first full budget since taking the job in the autumn of last year. I'm joined by a panel of people in business and experts in what's happening in the local communities to give their reaction to today's announcement. Our guests are Robert Forrester, CEO of Vertu Motors plc, Councillor Mieka Smiles, Deputy Mayor of Middlesbrough and Executive Member for Children's Services, Dr. Arnab Basu, CEO and founder of Cllr plc, and Pamela Petty, founder of Enterprising, which advises and mentors smaller businesses. Welcome our panel. Well, I'm going to start with you, Mieka, because as Deputy Mayor of Middlesbrough, you must have been very pleased to see that buried in the budget announcement was something special for Middlesbrough, and certainly for Teesside, in the announcement of a new investment zone. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, so I can remember going back to when Rishi was Chancellor. It was actually the first time in a budget that I'd heard Teesside mentioned, and the fact that that is continuing to happen just gives me a lot of satisfaction and reassurance.
And Teesside was mentioned twice, not just for the investment zones, but be part of the new Levelling Up Fund that's introduced?
Yeah, the fact that Levelling Up was mentioned, it means that Levelling Up's still alive, and I think that's great because it's something I'm really passionate about.
Okay.
But the investment zones, I think we obviously need more detail about it. But what's happened with a lot of the Levelling Up cash is it's like millions has been directed to Middlesbrough. We got 36 million Levelling Up cash. But what I think we need to be doing is making the environment more welcoming for investment, because there's only so much government money that there is. You know, the funds can't stretch on forever. So we just need to make sure that the environment is right for investment, and I think that that's what the investment zones will do. Okay, we'll come back and ask you a bit more about that in a minute. Robert, you run Vertu Motors. It's a large business, thousands of staff. How many staff now?
About 7,500.
7,500, significant numbers. What was your overall take on the economy and the budget? And the economy first, because the Office of Budget Responsibility gave a new forecast.
Yeah, I mean, it was nicely boring. I mean, we had enough excitement, didn't we, in September? So I think we're now through stabilisation, into let's get the debt down, let's lay the foundations for actually some sensible economic growth. I think there's some good things in there to try and free up labour markets and things, but we need a massive agenda on growth. Planning system is a massive problem, I think. Everyone you speak to, we haven't got enough houses. You know, it takes ages. I've got a planning application in Glasgow next week. I've been at it for 9 years.
My goodness.
So I think there's still a lot to be done, but I think economically, we're not in a crisis, I don't think, and that's a better position than we were 6 months ago.
But the debt the government has is still towering, isn't it?
Well, it is, but in fairness, they have been in power 13 years. Now, they weren't suddenly given a deck of cards. You know, the lockdown has cost us absolutely billions. We've got nearly 100% of net debt is against GDP, which is a pretty high amount. Some G7 people with higher, but
and nearly still half got a lot of that is lockdown related.
No, it's lockdown was the killer punch in terms of the finances, and that's going to constrain them in terms of doing things. We've got to be more productive as a country. The NHS is 10% of the economy and is actually getting less productive, so that's a big issue that needs tackling. And I think coming out of a crisis, we haven't really got visibility of how they're actually going to get economic growth. So I think that's the big unknown question.
Okay, we'll come back to the unknown question because it's the key question as well. Pamela, you advise small businesses, you look at small businesses. A lot of taxes were frozen beer duty, frozen fuel duty and so on. Also frozen allowances when it comes to income taxes. What was your instant takeaway from the budget?
I think kind of, that didn't really happen. There was nothing much in there. It was very boring, very stable. I did ask a lot of my clients and networks if I had a magic wand, what would they want from the budget? And I got very little response actually, and I think that maybe small businesses are always like that. They kind of just concentrate on what it is they're doing. Whatever's happening in the outside world is happening, but doesn't really stop me from getting on with what I need to do to run my business and get it to the next level. I think very different when you're a much bigger business and these things have a much bigger impact.
But also small businesses are sometimes disproportionately affected if growth dips. If we went into recession, which we were supposed to be in recession now, those small businesses would be in a lot worse position than maybe the bigger ones.
Possibly, but they are, by nature of being smaller, they tend to be much leaner. So they tend to be able to actually pick themselves up, spot an opportunity or turn a problem into an opportunity and actually be able to respond to it. So they're not as sort of wielding as some of the big businesses. So most of the people I've talked to, it's been a bit of a non-event really.
Okay. Arnab, your business is incredibly specialised and it's a science-based business. Before I ask you about the budget, just explain to people watching what your business does.
Yeah, it is a science R&D-led business. We specialise in certain technologies which are important in healthcare, medical, diagnostics, but also in defence and security. So ultimately, our technologies and products are keeping people safe in cities, around the countries, in borders, but also saving lives in detecting cancer early and so on and so forth. Yeah.
What was interesting, although Pamela wasn't, quite rightly was saying there wasn't a lot there for smaller business in the generality, there were some specific things that could help your business. There's a specific enhanced R&D credit, and it was for businesses that have more than 40% of their total spending in R&D. Do you qualify for something like that?
Look, the R&D tax credit has been a fantastic sort of incentive for R&D focused businesses, and it has been there for now over a decade really. We have benefited massively from it, but of course over the last year or so the R&D total tax benefit was curtailed, so about a third of that benefit was reduced, which would come into effect next year. The current announcement, just today's announcement of the 27p to a pound that you get back, is probably targeted at very, very early stage businesses, because 40% of your cost spent on R&D really happens when you're almost pre-revenue rather than when you're commercializing technology. So I think it'll be a great boost to the startup world, a great boost to very early stage companies. But I think companies which are in that growth phase, the current R&D tax credit regime has probably gone a step backwards rather than a step forward. So.
There was also a whole chunk of Jeremy Hunt's speech about science-based businesses. Was he attaching himself to what seemed to be trendy and seemed to be advanced? Do you see it in day-to-day work, the government engaging with science-based businesses?
Look, I think it is absolutely critical that the country needs growth, and the growth is going to come from innovation. Innovation has to be absolutely central to the agenda of the government and where industry is focused on. There are a lot of good things that are in the budget. I mean, enterprise zones, R&D businesses will, and early stage businesses will also benefit from that. I think a few things that we're not clear yet on what's happening to the Horizon program, for example. This is a big program that after coming out of Europe, there was a guarantee that that program is going to be continued. And I think steps are being taken in the right direction, but it is about how we keep at the forefront of technologies in which we are very good at, like genomics, like healthcare. And I think whatever we can do as a country to be the world leaders, not followers, but real leaders in creating value is going to be critical.
Okay. Now, Mieka, there were some specifics. Let's start to get into some of the specifics to help grow the economy. I'm going to ask Robert this question because he employs 7,000 people, but you oversee children's services at Middlesbrough Council. And we had this ability now for young parents to claim or to have 30 hours of free childcare. It will take a little bit to get into the system. Is this a good thing, and is it possible to deliver it? Are there enough child carers?
I think it's a hugely positive thing. It's something, my children are a little bit older now, but I would have valued that so much. It would have got me back into full-time work a lot quicker. And I think that has not just benefits for the economy, but also people's mental health sometimes. So yeah, I think it's hugely positive. I do think it's going to take, like, well, they've set out a timeline, haven't they? It's not going to happen straight away. And it's going to take a little bit of time to deliver. But I hope it does, because I think at the moment what happens is that mums take a break from the workplace and don't actually end up going back. And I think that, you know, your 30s and early 40s are a fantastic time potentially in your career. So I think it's a really positive thing.
Robert, you and I are a similar age. When we started our working life, university students were subsidised. They didn't have to pay, and they had maintenance grants. Now they do have to pay. They're not subsidised as much, and the subsidy is going from the government to these early years. As an employer, does it make sense to have that change?
It's an interesting question, actually. We live in a high tax country where we've got a high level of debt, and the government's just announced another big programme, which is another
welfare leg, yeah.
Actually, in the short term, clearly it's going to be beneficial. People will be able to come back to work. We need more people. You know, there's still a shortage of labour, massive shortage of labour, and actually the supply side thing like that is probably a very good thing. I just think conceptually we might be better off in the long run. People be able to afford to go back to work because the incentive to work through actually earning money and paying less tax actually pays for it. I think that would probably be a better route, but actually given the fix they're in with the labour market at the moment, where so many people have just disappeared off the pitch completely, I think it probably is a good move. How you move back from that will be very interesting. Is that then baked in? I mean, income tax was temporary when it was introduced and still here.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing that is here now is a welfare state, and the government announced in the budget this change to disability benefits. So work capability assessments, you don't have to prove that you're not capable of work. If you've got a disability assessment, you can, as I understood it, come and work for someone like Vertu Motors and keep your salary and your benefit.
I think we've got to see the detail of that, because it just sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? Actually. But getting more people being productive. One of our great productivity problems is a good percentage of the adult population is not working. A lot of people over 50s are giving up. A lot of people actually under 30 have got mental health issues and have actually come out of the workforce. And we've got to engage with these populations to get them into the productive workforce and get them working. We've got a big demographic over the age of 70. You know, we've got to pay for them, and the adult workforce have got to actually come to work and pay for them.
Pamela, I thought it was interesting that as well as targeting people, children, and also people with disabilities, he didn't shy away from using the word sanctions on people who maybe have long-term unemployment and are not taking the opportunity of work coaching, extra training, and filling these vacancies. You look after a lot of small businesses. If they had the ability to take some of these people on, would they?
Absolutely. I mean, every decade of your life brings about a different set of experience and skills and thirst to work. And I think that's. I just hope that the money doesn't get swallowed up by work coaches, and we actually don't end up with a real positive result on that and getting people back into work. And it's, you know, it's having that thirst to work, and it does come back to money in a lot of ways.
There was talk of returnships, apprenticeships,
Yes.
and I actually quite like that.
Yes, I do as
That
well.
was a good idea, actually.
Because
Yeah.
you're, I mean, we're in a BMW dealership now, and the sales people, the people that are dealing with customers, they're all types of demographics. You
Yeah,
have lots
absolutely.
of regular people, but they seem to know their product. I can't imagine that I could walk in, get a job with you, and sell one of these quite complex vehicles without a lot of training. But you wouldn't necessarily need me to be young or old or able-bodied. You could employ
No, I
anyone.
think the world's moving so fast that the thought of leaving school and doing the same job for 45 years is quite rare. I've just signed a long service award, 60 years continuous service, but I mean, I think we're probably past that now. I think we are needing to re-educate as employers all the time, because things are moving very fast. I've got job titles I didn't even know existed. They wouldn't have existed 5 years ago. So I think we've got to get that apprenticeship throughout the.
So if I'd
demographic,
left the
really.
workforce during the pandemic, and I'd made a decision now that in my mid or late 50s I wanted to return to the workforce, would a company like yours want to engage on this returnship retraining for someone
Yeah, I think
my
so.
age?
I think they would. Our vacancies, we had 500 vacancies 18 months ago. We're down to 300 vacancies now. But still, I prefer people to be working and productive rather than have vacancies. That's not a good thing, vacancies.
Now, Arnab, your work situation is very different because the kind of people you're employing have been from the local universities quite often, but also internationally. They're highly trained scientists.
Yep.
How are you dealing with the recruitment issues you face?
Look, recruitment has been very challenging in the last couple of years. In the science sector, and particularly in technology and engineering, the market has been very, very difficult. If I look in the US, it's been the same because we operate in the US as well. I think we need to introduce more structured training programs. Apprenticeship is a great thing to do, and we actually have graduate apprentices, which are a great benefit to the company. So training and making STEM a real focus area from schools to universities or higher education or any other FE is going to be critical to be a science-led nation.
There aren't many STEM organisations in the country, but there is in County Durham. There is the STEM Foundation, North East STEM Foundation, which has a school at Cllr, isn't there? I don't know if you've come across this. Is this the kind of thing you positively engage with?
We engage with a variety of FEs, and I think it is absolutely critical that more innovation there is space to innovate within the training and the education sector. UTCs are a good example again, and also the math schools that have been talked about, and those will also be very, very good. So employers who are looking for high skill end employees need to really have access to those in greater numbers.
Okay. Now, another thing that the Chancellor focused on, the government is going to continue for another 3 months subsidising people's energy bills so that it can suppress inflation. Now, I presume as someone selling consumer products, you're pretty pleased with that, Robert.
Yeah, because it's not the fault of the average person in this country that energy has shot through the roof. Actually, it's the fault of the government, particularly, for having a rubbish energy policy for about 25 years. And when they finally introduced nuclear energy, when they've been phasing it out for the past 20 years, 2050 is the date it comes on. So I think the government has to step in and do that, because if they hadn't, businesses would have gone to the wall. And I actually think that consumers would have really struggled, and we'd be in a major recession if they hadn't done it.
I remember you telling me privately, when they introduced this scheme in September, prior to the sad passing of the Queen, that weekend after, you saw some
It was surprisingly robust, actually.
Yeah.
I was expecting, with the combination of energy and the monarch dying, a real dearth of orders. But actually, as soon as the energy announcement was made, customers had the confidence to come in. There was absolutely no question about that at all.
And it's an entirely different situation, though, for businesses, because he's not going to be subsidising the business energy costs. What he was saying, and this is a long-term game, is he wants to get resilience in supply. He brought in the prospect of more nuclear, which I think Teesside would like to play host to. But Arnab, you might know a bit more about this than I. That nuclear energy is now going to be, it seems sensible, categorised as sustainable and therefore ESG compliant. It's not going to be an unethical investment.
I think it is fantastic news, and I think it is, in a way, it's acknowledging what the reality on the ground is, because nuclear is still the cleanest form of energy which can be regularized and have a continuous supply. Now, since the Fukushima disaster in Japan, the nuclear industry has been on back foot. So all the PR has been defensive PR. But the concerns on safety of nuclear are sometimes quite unfounded in a way, because nuclear is very, very safe form of energy and clean form of energy. And that has to be part of our energy mix going forward. How do we do nuclear energy much more widely than in countries like ours is a different question. And there, I think we can take a leadership position on nuclear safety, nuclear resilience. And I think the government has a role to play in that, which will also help industry to be part of that, almost a regulatory framework where safe nuclear energy becomes part of the global energy mix.
And one of your products monitors for radiation, doesn't it? So it is all linked.
Yes, very much so. So every nuclear power plant in the UK has our product monitoring on a daily basis. And nuclear energy can be delivered very safely as long as the right checks and balances are there. And we are very good at it in the UK. But as nuclear energy starts to proliferate in areas which may be naturally unstable, earthquake prone and so on and so forth, but also geopolitically unstable, we do need to have safety standards and monitoring standards where I think there is a scope for us to take a leadership position in that.
Okay, now Mieka, here we are in Teesside, which is the power of the Northern Powerhouse, because all around Teesside, new power projects are coming on board. We've just been talking about nuclear. Hartlepool Nuclear Power Station has had its life extended. We could be a site for SMR reactors. And we've got the carbon capture and storage that was mentioned in the budget going to happen in Teesside, which will allow us to have a big new fossil fuel powered power station. How do you see this circular economy, as it's described here, developing?
I think obviously Teesside's set up for industry, isn't it? So we need to make sure that we're on the front foot in terms of switching it up and making it about renewable energy, because it's win-win, isn't it?
We're building the wind farm here in Teesside for the Dogger Bank at the development.
In fairness, Graham, since September, the entire roof of this is now solar.
Right.
Amazing.
So the energy in this business is being generated by the roof.
Dan, and you've got solar here, you've got wind on the North Sea, and possibly carbon capture as well. This balancing of energy, when do you think we're going to see the energy costs come down with all this renewable? That's the frustration, isn't it?
Yeah.
Quite quickly, I think.
Have you had it come down as a
Yeah,
result?
no, we're definitely seeing energy prices coming down. I think our budget assumptions I think we're already seeing a saving against it. And actually, we're putting 3 million into solar this year, 1.5 million into LED lighting. And our expectation is to be so many people are doing that the supply has to come back. And we think energy will get relatively cheap again. Maybe not back to where it was, but certainly what I've seen it coming down.
Well, Mieka, you've obviously got a good story to tell in Teesside. You've done well out of it. Hopefully Middlesbrough, my hometown, will look different in a few years as a result. But I am going to give the last word to Robert, because you're our host today. The budget isn't any great shakes, is really how many people think, but will the economy be in much better shape as a result of the decisions taken today?
Yes, because they weren't mental. So actually the fundamental underpinning of an economy is a strong political base where you have stable government and sensible economic policies so people can plan and invest. And there's lots you could argue about, 25% corporation tax reduces investment and all this, but actually at least we seem to have some platform to move forward, which actually 6 months ago, we failed to realise that actually we had a lot of money to foreign creditors because we've got 100% of GDP as national debt. And, we are now getting, I think, some visibility of a sustainable future.
And you're positive?
Yeah, because government should be benign, I think, and I think they should let business get on with it. So, yeah, I'm quite happy, actually.
Well, on that basis, I want to thank all my three guests, Mieka, Arnab, Pamela and Robert, and thank you for joining us on Business Unmuted.